There are a ton of moving parts inside the Husker football program right now, and we're going to try and cover every angle. So hit that like for us and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of it. But Gary, let's start with the first thing I saw on my phone today, which was a message from you, the tweet from Sean Callahan about Tony White leaving to be the next defensive coordinator at Florida State. While FSU is a prestigious school with a crazy amount of in-state talent, no state taxes, like I get it, it's a good draw. I guess I just didn't expect him to leave Nebraska for a lateral move. I thought he would be head coach Tony White somewhere next season, or maybe, just maybe, we sandbagged his value just enough by going 6-6 that he'd have to stay one more year. Gary, was it the loss to Iowa, the overall disappointing offense all year that just couldn't pull its weight for the defense? Like, why do you think he left, and how big of a deal is it?
It's a big deal for sure. I don't think it's so much Tony White wanting to leave to take a lateral job. Again, this is my opinion. This isn't anything else other than just my feel based off of what we do know. When Holgerson was brought in to advise or look over what Satterfield was doing, Phil Snow also was on the defensive side. And you can say numbers and stats and things like that speak for themselves on Tony White's end. There's no excuse for the way the defense looked against Indiana. There's no excuse for the way they couldn't get off the field at home against a non-bowl eligible team like UCLA when you're trying to lock up bowl eligibility. So without a doubt, Tony White's been the brightest spot of this coaching staff since they all came in. Is it jaw-dropping? Is it astounding? Is it so great of a defense that it can't be replaced? And I don't think the answer to that is yes. I think the answer is clearly no. Again, to your point, the offense and especially special teams this year did nothing to help the defense. But when you combine one of my biggest pet peeves with it and what a lot of people saw was how soft the zones were in the middle of the field, how lackluster the secondary looked in passing game. The defense hung its hat on not allowing rushing touchdowns until Indiana decided, okay, we'll show you that we can absolutely run all over you. And they did. I think Tony White is a great defensive coordinator. I think he will be a head coach. But I think the situation he was in at Nebraska, with as bad as the offense has looked, as bad as the special teams has looked, it made his defenses look even better because they were majority of the time the only bright spot on the field. There's for sure games, take the Indiana game, take the UCLA game. If our offense is able to click and get some rhythm and put some points on the board, now we're talking about games we lost because the defense wouldn't do its thing. The Illinois game, we talked about that, how this is that defense we worry about that comes up, that shows up to games and doesn't tackle or is out of place, not discipline gap assignments. So there's definitely weaknesses and things that need to be addressed on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to have to be addressed now because you're going to be looking for a new defensive coordinator and a handful of players. We've already seen, as the time we're recording this, there's going to be more for sure. But I mean, Mekhi Bayer, Jamari Butler, Vincent Jackson, Stephon Thompson, guys like that are already starting to go. And we can get into that, probably a different video when we get a better grasp of who's actually leaving and what that means for the team. But I think that when Phil Snow was brought in, it kind of rubbed Tony the wrong way. I find it hard to believe that Matt Rule did that and then went, oh, I didn't think he'd be upset. You know what I mean? I think it was kind of a mind game with Matt Rule. And again, my opinion, that I want to look and see what's going on, but we're on borrowed time with Tony White anyways. So I don't want to get the offense redone and it's clicking, address the Ed Foley or not address the Ed Foley situation in the offseason, get the special teams going. And then we still have these games where we can't tackle and we can't stop mid-range passes. We're letting every team march right downfield and get in the red zone. And then we play defense. Or he gets a head coach job a year later, and now we have to revamp the defensive staff and players that are going to leave because he leaves. So part of me thinks this is kind of a strategic move by Rule of, you look back to his time at Temple and Baylor, he walked in and he wiped the slate clean. Rosters, coaching staff, everything. He did things a little different at Nebraska because he talked about how much talent there was still here. Not a horrible culture, but just a losing culture, things like that. And I felt like he kind of tried to straddle that line of, I'm going to revamp this thing and make it mine, to I'm going to keep a lot of these guys and players and things that the fan base loves and that has strong ties to the to the program. And I can't help but think he kind of starts second guessing that when things weren't going the way that he felt they should be going and the time they should be going. And I almost think it was a little nudge of like, you're not replaceable. Maybe start looking for a place to go since we know we're going to lose you at some point, anyways. And let's rip this band-aid off and get the guys that I initially wanted here, which kind of leads me into now the next thing. Are we looking at a Phil Snow defensive coordinator, or are we looking at a John Butler defensive coordinator?
So as far as John Butler goes, I feel like the general pulse on him is people are worried because the weakness of our defense was clearly the secondary, and that's what he was coaching. Do you agree or disagree with me that it's a little unfair to blame him when it was his first year with the team and he showed up to cook dinner and the ingredients were all 5'5"?
Yeah, I agree 100%. To me, John Butler is a lot like Dana Holgerson, where he came in late in the summer after Cooper left, and what he had is what he had. You know, as we're getting ready for our first game of the season, going into the final stretch of training and practices, he's trying to learn the defensive scheme, 3-3-5, players' names, the rotations of what guys can play both corner and safety, what guys play or that rover type position, how it's implemented. The thing about John Butler that I really like and that I think has not been talked about much or gets overlooked, I want to say it was Rutgers game. A lot of people gave praise to Tony White because he wasn't afraid to change up and not just run 3-3-5. He was willing to adjust to other teams and whatnot. John Butler was the biggest reason for that, trying to get them to implement more quarters defense on the back end, which typically you do when you need to help some of your guys. He's been a defensive coordinator at Penn State. He was the defensive back coach for the Bills for multiple years when they had multiple Pro Bowlers and things. Like, the guy knows what he's doing, how to coach. I don't think every great coach can just take any player and make them or their position look amazing. So to answer your question, for him not to have any say whatsoever in recruiting for DBs, position changes, you see a lot of linebackers will go back there, wide receivers will go back there. It'd be no different than Dana Holgerson the last few games, right? Like, to go, well, I mean, it was a little bit better than when Satterfield was calling plays, but not much better. It's like, yeah, I mean, he got thrown in and said, here, call this guy's plays. I prefer him over Phil Snow because Phil Snow's 63 years old. The defenses have been good at Temple and Baylor. I don't think that they've been astounding, like, oh my God, we're going to get this defense. Where John Butler, we talked about it when they hired him. I've been a Bills fan my whole life. I was very familiar with him, knew exactly what we were getting, who he was. He essentially left Buffalo because they went with Bobby Babbitt for the defensive coordinator position and not him. And his whole thing was, he's getting old. He's 50-some years old. I'm not bouncing around assistant or position coaches anymore. I want to be a defensive coordinator somewhere. And then seems weird that right before the season starts, he leaves from just quitting an NFL position coach position to taking a college position, right? So I think we both kind of talked in. It kind of seemed like they were setting the table for him to be ready to be the defensive coordinator if and when Tony White left. I know a lot of people are talking about Knighton. Sounds like he's more likely going with Tony White to Florida State. Maybe there's more to that. Also, I just feel like it was almost kind of like set up ahead of time.